There we go. Sorry. So this first area is around integrating peer workers into both traditional settings like recovery community organizations, and I guess you could call even treatment centers more kind of traditional settings, but also non-traditional settings like public libraries or schools, jails and prisons, other nonprofit organizations, community centers. Like, we believe that there is a place for peer workers in a variety of settings, not just treatment centers, not just recovery community organizations where peer recovery support specialists have sort of traditionally been deployed. So that's the first area. The second area, and this is the area that I'm assigned to because of my background working in recovery community organizations. This is around building and strengthening the capacity of recovery community organizations. So one of the things that we know is that recovery community organizations are one of the primary trainers of recovery coaches or peer recovery support specialists, and oftentimes recovery community organizations employ either as paid staff or volunteers. So they employ and support and supervise and manage and recruit and retain peer workers. And a lot of the RCOs across the country, not all, but many, are struggling with building capacity. So recovery community organizations get started, they get going, they might be a couple of years in, and they kind of hit this wall where they are facing issues of funding or just infrastructure development or other capacity building barriers and challenges. So one of the things that the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence does is help RCOs across the country build and strengthen their capacity through various forms of training and technical assistance. The third thing that we do, the third area of focus, and these are in no particular order, is enhancing the professionalization of peers through workforce development. So workforce development is a really big issue. Many peers are being employed in clinical settings where the role of a peer isn't always understood. Sometimes they're being supervised by clinical folks who just don't have that sort of the peer lens. And so there are some issues around workforce development that we're really working on, helping to address so that we can really elevate the peer workforce across the country. And then the fourth area is providing an evidence-based toolkit and resource information, but also practice-based evidence. So there's not as much research around peer support as there is around clinical support, but there is some, and we want people who are training and employing and supervising and working as peer recovery support specialists to have access to the research that is always already out there, and especially people who are like working in nonprofit organizations that are seeking funding. Oftentimes the funders they love evidence-based practices, right? They want to see the research, they want to know whether something works or not, and it can be difficult for people to access that research because it just hasn't been around as long as the clinical research. And so I'm going to share some resources with you on our website in just a few minutes that addresses this. And then of course the fifth core I already mentioned is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have just recently added that as our fifth core area of focus. So because it's such an important And an important piece of this work, there's, as we know, there are incredible disparities in the addiction recovery field and other fields and sectors of behavioral health. And so having that diversity, equity, inclusion lens is important to our work. So those are, how do I advance my slide? Sorry. I wonder. Sorry, everyone. I'm just hitting enter and nothing's happening.
It doesn't like you for some reason.
It doesn't.
Try hitting your right arrow.
Right arrow. No. This is funny. There's definitely something going on with my computer. Steve, when you were doing your introductory slides, my whole computer just crashed. And so I was like, trying to get it back online, and it took a couple minutes. And when I came back, my heart was beating and you were still talking. So I was
let's try. Why don't you try to stop share and then try and reshare again? Does that make sense? So just stop your screen share and then try and reshare and see if we can reset it.
Yeah, but my mouse doesn't even work.
I can also, now if you would like, I can share the slides and just forward them as you talk.
That's a good idea.
That would be great, but honestly, my mouse is like dead. It won't even allow me to hit the stop share button.
Oh, there we go. You did something.
I force close the share. I can just share if that's okay, and you can talk. Okay. It'll just give me 1 minute to get those up.
Okay.
And Parker is the host with the most, ladies and gentlemen. He knows how to do this kind of stuff. So thank you, Parker.
Yes, thank you, Parker.
In the meantime, while we're waiting too, now there's some good questions coming into the chat. So I think at some point, when you're ready, we can either have folks unmute and maybe ask some questions or whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is the slide we left off on.
Okay. Yes, that is. I'm just looking at the chat, and yes, there's lots of people here who are working in the peer recovery space, which is great to see. Full-time peer specialists in your men's program. What if PR support can be stationed in non-clinical settings? Yeah, maybe I'll address that question first. Cassandra asks if peer recovery support can be stationed in non-clinical settings, and yes, it can. I mentioned that there are some states that are even looking at putting peer specialists in public libraries. So especially in urban settings where sometimes people are using the public libraries, people who are unhoused might be using the public library as a safe space where they can, use the internet or get in out of the rain. That we're trying to encourage organizations, different community centers to have peer recovery support specialists in any place where they might be able to intersect with those who might be struggling with substances and could use some peer support. So yes, it's possible, it's happening. We would love to see more of it. I would love to hear if anyone here has examples of seeing peer support in non-clinical settings in your communities. I'd love to hear about that. We are tracking it as best we can and hoping to see more of that. Parker, let's go to the next slide. And then the next slide. So these slides actually just kind of go a little bit deeper into what I've already talked about. So, you know, that first area of focus has to do with peer integration. So this is just kind of a little bit of a repeat of what I've already mentioned, looking at, you know, integrating peer support in both traditional and non-traditional, so clinical and non-clinical settings, as I just mentioned. So you can go to the next slide. Recovery community organization capacity building. Next. We provide training, resources, and mentorship opportunities that help build capacity of recovery community organizations so that we can support the growth and sustainability of the peer recovery workforce. We get all kinds of requests for training and technical assistance for recovery community organizations. And in some ways, sometimes the requests that we get aren't directly related to providing peer support or, like, you know, creating and developing peer support programs. It can have more to do with, like I said, like building infrastructure, capacity building of recovery community organizations. And many of you probably work for, you know, could in some ways fit the definition of a recovery community organization, even if you're not an advocacy organization. But if you are an independent grassroots nonprofit organization that's run and led by members of the local recovery community, you could probably call yourself a recovery community organization, even if you don't normally in your day-to-day language. But so I just say that to encourage you to don't write us off or write yourselves off as not being a fit for requesting technical assistance. Even if it has to do with something like data collection or community outreach, or, you know, building a standard operating procedures manual, or putting policies and procedures in place, you know, like something that has to do with infrastructure building, capacity building, so that you can then successfully deliver peer-based recovery support, if that makes sense. You can go to the next slide, Parker. Workforce development. Next slide. Creating strategies and implementation plans to recruit and develop the peer workforce in all levels of substance use service systems. So, like I mentioned, there's a fair amount of misunderstanding out there around the value and role of a peer worker. And at the same time, the peer workforce is growing like crazy. I actually went on Indeed, which is an online job recruitment portal. You guys heard of Indeed, and just typed in peer support, peer recovery support, and there were like hundreds of hits. So there are behavioral health organizations, hospitals, treatment centers, clinical businesses all over the place that are hiring peers. So the peer workforce is really, really growing, and we really want to focus on, you know, helping to create these strategies and implementation plans, not only to recruit and develop the peer workforce, but to make sure that the peer workforce is adequately supported and understood and paid and trained, and you know, all of those important factors that go into developing a healthy, robust workforce. I'm just going to catch up on the chat real quick here. Anything in here that I should be addressing right away? Peer recovery support is being used increasingly in harm reduction programs, natural fit for people with lived experience, and very effective in helping those who want to get connected to treatment and other services. Yes, that is great. Thank you for pointing that out, Paul. And yeah, the entire addictions field was once made up almost completely of peer recovery individuals, right? Yes. And then it went totally clinical, right? And now, we're starting to integrate peer workers back into the field. And there is, one of the challenges one of the benefits of being involved in the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence is that we really have access to the people who are kind of boots on the ground doing this work day in and day out. I talk to people who work in recovery community organizations every day, and I'm hearing a lot of the same same challenges and the same things. But I know I've already mentioned this a couple of times, but when you train a peer worker and place them in say a treatment center, a clinical setting where there's Medicaid reimbursement, and their role, they're being supervised by someone who has a clinical background, and it can become very much about like documentation and sort of like peer workers are not addiction techs in treatment centers. And we don't want them to be treated as such. They have a very unique, very important role that's different from a clinical role. So, that is part of this whole issue around workforce development. So one of the things that's happening across the country is that some folks are providing trainings for people who supervise peers in clinical settings. So we're training clinicians around the role of a peer worker. So we're making some progress, but it's something that we've seen come up again and again. So Parker, you can go to the next slide. And then this is that last core area, both evidence-based practice and practice-based evidence. So improving the dissemination of peer recovery support, evidence-based practices, and the practice-based evidence so that people really have easy access to it, especially if they're applying for grants or funding where they need to sort of prove the efficacy of peer support to their funders. And next slide. Oh, my mouse is back. This slide just talks a little bit about what is technical assistance. That's kind of a jargony phrase. Maybe if you work within the ATTC or something, you'd be very familiar with what technical assistance is. It basically means, what does it mean? It just means help. we can provide, there's a lot of information that is out there that is housed within the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence and other resource hubs that we have access to, that our work is really about transferring that knowledge and helping people develop skills around it. And so that is sort of at the very the center of our work. So we see all kinds of different requests for help. Some people might want help with training peers or supervising peers, or building capacity in their recovery community organization, or how do you apply for a grant, or we're a brand new organization and we're just hiring people and I don't know how to onboard them, or what I need to do in terms of human resources. Like, it's all across the board. So again, if there are things that you need help with that relate to the peer recovery space, submit a ticket. It's very easy, or a request. It's a very easy process to submit a request. If it's not a fit, we will let you know. But chances are, unless you're asking us for cash, then chances are we can help you. So that's just a little bit about, I think sometimes people scratch their heads a little bit like, what is a technical assistance? And what kind of training are you talking about? So yes, trainings, webinars, exam prep, workforce issues, etc. Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Next slide. Here we go. So here's some examples of technical assistance. We have a learning collaborative that we offer each year. It's a 6-month-long learning collaborative. In the first year, we did it around volunteer management to help recovery community organizations build volunteer programs. The second year, we did our learning collaborative around outreach and community building. We just finished that learning collaborative up. It was 6 months long. We had webinars once a month and lots of we called it extensions learning. So sort of little mini sessions between our monthly webinars. All of this stuff can be found on our website. All the volunteer management sessions were recorded, and I'll show you where you can find them. And also the outreach and community engagement sessions were recorded and are still available. The peer affinity calls happen once a month, and these are monthly phone calls for peer recovery support specialists or those in similar roles. I mean, even maybe for somebody who's not a peer support worker, but maybe is supervising a peer coach. It's a way for them to share information. We usually have a speaker and a topic, and you can see the list of different topics ahead of time on our website, or if you sign up for our newsletter. So that's a great way to sort of get connected to support within the peer space. We've changed the name of the peer affinity calls to I'm just blanking out on the new name, but it's on the website, so that'll jog my memory. Another example of technical assistance around peer integration. We've done some self-paced online learning modules that take people through best practices for integrating peer recovery support services into clinical teams. And then we created a literature review on the use and benefits of peer recovery support services in institutional and community-based settings. So this is where that evidence-based practice focus comes in. We created a literature review, which could be very helpful to people. So next slide. This is just a nice quote by William White, recovery historian you're probably familiar with. He says, "Today we stand to remind ourselves and to send a message to those still wounded. Recovery is contagious. If you want it, you have to get close to it and stay close to it. You have to catch it and keep catching it, and you have to pass it on to others." And I think that's my last slide. Here's a couple links to our social media. Parker, can you pull up our website? It's peerrecoverynow.org. Actually, my mouse is back. Maybe you could throw it back over to me. And no.
The mouse has returned, Nell, but for how long?
Yeah, right. And actually, it's not giving me a share option.
Try it now.
I'm searching up the website for you.
Okay. Yeah, if you could pull it up.
And you should be able to share now, Nell, if you want to try it. Got it.
I just remembered also, no, I'm not. The peer affinity calls, I said we changed the name. They are now called communities of practice calls. And those calls are amazing. I would encourage you to look at the schedule, and I know everyone has very busy work schedules already, but if you ever have a chance to join, here's our website. Thank you. So the first thing that you'll see, and our website is in the process of being completely redone. So it's there's a lot of words on this page, but here's the very first thing you see is about becoming an organizational stakeholder. So we have monthly organizational stakeholder calls. If you want to scroll just a little bit, Paul, there are some explainer videos here. So these are just little 2-minute videos that they're animated videos that talk about what is peer support, what is a recovery community organization, what is recovery capital, and what is a recovery-oriented system of care. So those are good educational tools. And feel free to share them if you like. Maybe go back up and go to trainings and events at the very top. So here's a schedule. There are, these are the learning collaboratives. The very first one you see there is the learning collaborative that I mentioned. There's all kinds of different stuff here that each one of the core focus areas is producing. So I won't go through everything here, but I just wanted you to see some of the places where you can kind of poke around and see what we're offering. So I'll let you scroll through these on your own. There's both upcoming events and past events that have been recorded. So there's lots of resources here. Then if you go, Paul or Parker, if you go back up to From the Field, there's a link there for organizational stakeholders. If you want to take part in any of these calls, we welcome your participation. This is a way for us to hear from you, and it really helps us shape our work. You know, we do not want to be a stuffy academic institution that's just making up work behind closed doors. Like, it really, the work needs to come from the community. So this is how we interact with the people who are doing the work out there in the world, and we do want to hear from you. So these are great calls as well. If you have any events that you want to promote, this is a great place to do it. You know, you can let us know, and we can put it in our newsletter or just make an announcement to our organizational stakeholders. And our list of organizational stakeholders is pretty big. I don't know the exact number, but it's in the hundreds of folks from across the country who are, have cross sectors with the peer space. So, and then Parker, if you can go back up, I just want to show you one more thing. Yeah, click on resources. There's a resource library there, but if you could click on our products, this, and then scroll. These little purple, it looks like purple booklets, these are all products that we have created in the last 2 years that could be good resources for you all. So here's the first one you'll see is the comparative analysis of state requirements for peer support specialists training and certification. So it's not a standardized process. In Minnesota, I think you have to have 46 hours of training, and then I think you pay a fee through ICNRC to get certified. The addiction recovery certification is separate from the mental health certification. In other states, you don't need 46 hours. It might be less, it might be more. Mental health and addiction might be together. So this is a, if you're interested, that's a useful resource. The second one is we did a really deep assessment of recovery community organizations across the nation to see, you know, we started with a sense of, we think we know what RCOs need, but let's ask them. And so we did a really deep dive into that, and that report is there. And then there's a couple of other, the lit review that I mentioned is, if you scroll down, is there. There's a couple of other resources here. So I'm sweating. I feel like I'm talking fast. And I've shown you a lot. Thank you, Parker. If you want to close out of that screen, you can, and maybe we can all come back together. I would love to take questions if anyone has questions, or even comments if there are things that you expected to hear about and didn't hear about. Would love to hear that too.
Thank you so much, Nell. This is a great refresher for me, and I really enjoy hearing about your organization too. Like, I think maybe we could open the floor. I've seen some heads nodding on those that have their camera turned on, so I know we have some folks that are in the peer recovery field here with us. So let's open the floor. If there are some questions, you feel free to unmute, and we can have a dialogue with Nell.
All right, I guess I'll start just because I hate silence. Well, thank you again, Nell. This is great. You know, as we work with our TOR grantees, I think one of the most frequent discussions I have is about peers and being able to, you know, contract with peers, train peers, hire peers with TOR funds. And we made for the TOR 22 grant, which is in the process now of selecting applicants. You know, we in the notice of funding opportunity, we made sure we were very clear and expanded the area of recovery supports and talked about all the different allowable activities related to peers that can be done under TOR. So we're hoping to see a lot more hiring of peers, training of peers, et cetera, in this next cohort that'll be announced next month.
That's great.
And I know when I talked to Michael King and some folks earlier this year, you know, they talked to me about and I let them know where I was, the communities of practice. That's one of your focuses, including American Indian, Alaska Native communities. I know you do a regular like Wellbriety circle of peers involved in that program. I'm wondering what else you do kind of in that vein, particularly obviously with the AIAN populations, or what you might be looking to do in the future, just to kind of help bring that group together and make them aware of all the resources that you have, things like that.
Yeah, you know, Shannon Roberts, who works in our coordinating center, was going to send me some bullet points before this meeting that sort of lays out some of the work that we're doing in that area, and I didn't get the bullet points. So I would, if I could, I would like to follow up with this group around what specifically we are doing, because I know that there are some activities specifically related to that area. I just don't know exactly what they are. so I'm sort of embarrassed that I don't have that list. But I can get
That's
that.
okay. We'd be happy to forward any information you get to us.
Yeah, I definitely will. I see that Adam is on the call. I don't know, Adam, if you are really here and if you might know. Oh, there he is. Hi. Adam, do you know?
I know.
Hi.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm sorry, I didn't want to sort of interrupt you while you were in the middle of your thing, but I was able to join. Fantastic job presenting on the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. Yeah, I am even newer to the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence than now. One of the things I can share is that as part of our new core focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are really thinking through lots of additional programming to support different populations of folks who are doing the peer work, to make sure that we're responsive to their specific needs and the things that come up that are specific to those different contexts. So we're working with a lot of tribal and Native organizations that are doing peer recovery work. First of all, to hear from them what it is that they would like to do. We actually did a focus group specifically on the topic of recovery funding, how folks are getting funding, where it's coming from, what are the specific challenges, and that was specific to recovery organizations that were based in tribal territories or working with Native populations. So that is hopefully going to lead to a whole series of different products that we'll put out in collaboration with the folks who did that, and that will be open to everyone. But I think that one of the things that I heard Nell say that I want to reiterate is that we're really open to hearing what more we could do. This is going to be an area that we're focusing on in the next year with the addition of this additional core. And so this is a really great opportunity to share that with us now as well as afterward, because this doesn't have to be a single conversation, to say, you know, what are the things that you want to see? What would be useful for you in the work that you're doing? Even if it's not there on the website, we will work to make sure that we're being responsive to the challenges that you're facing and the supports that you need. So just want to put my 2 cents in there.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much. And thank you, Joseph, for mentioning that in the chat. I'm not familiar with the Warrior Down program, so I'll definitely look into it. And you know, you don't have to wait for the next Communities of Practice call in order to share your you know, what you want to share with us. I put my email in the chat and Adam put his there as well, so you can reach out directly. And yeah, we just really want to hear from you around, you know, how we can support you and what you need, what, you know, what kinds of challenges or successes are you facing, what's working, what's not, what, you know, how can we move this forward. So please reach out. Cherokee Nation also has a peer recovery program called Peaceful Warriors. Wow, I am writing this down. That's great. Any others? Any other peer recovery programs? Or questions?
This is Kathy. How do you work with state certification bodies? And in your diversity, do you have Native American people in your either volunteer or hired into your diversity section to represent, I mean, from different parts of the country, not just one Native person, but different parts of the country representation? Just curious.
Yeah, not on, that's one thing actually I forgot to mention. I think there's a slide in there, maybe it just somehow got skipped with all my technical difficulties, but the structure of the steering committee is that there are 6 people from across the country who were all persons with lived experience, and we come from, you know, a variety of backgrounds. Michael King, who lives in Washington State, he has a background in leadership development. He's on the steering committee. Myself, with my background in recovery community organizations. There's a gentleman named Hanir Hernandez who lives in Boston. He has an incredible background and focuses primarily on, Adam, would you say criminal justice? Lori Johnson Wade is in Pennsylvania. She's a person of color who runs a recovery community organization in her state. She's on the board of Faces and Voices of Recovery. Joanna Dolan is in Maryland. She's a member of the LGBTQ plus community. She does a lot of training of peers across the country. Who am I missing? Can you think, is that it? I think that's
and you.
That, yeah. And me, yes. So with only 6 people, we don't, I mean, it is, there's definitely room for improvement there. You know, one of the ways that we address that, Kathy, is through our communities of practice and our organizational stakeholders gatherings, and, you know, to really, we want to lift up, you know, all voices and really sort of like open the doors for people to participate. So yeah, and now I think, you know, having this 5th core area of focus around diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to help with that. So there are some gaps still, but if you have anyone who you know, you could recommend, we haven't quite figured out how if we're gonna add another member to the steering committee to kind of staff, so to speak, the DE&I focus, but we might be doing that. And so please let us know if there's anyone that you think that we should be talking to.
There are several people on this webinar who would be good candidates to represent various tribal communities. So I'll extend your, if you will, your invitation to them, because peer recovery in Native American communities is pretty, depending on how people have to deal with their state systems, or do they have to deal with, I mean, tribal government might be fine and they don't really need to deal with their state systems, but it is also a workforce development issue, where they could get, you know, paid for doing their work. And so I don't want to minimize that. And I do want to make a comment that, you know, I've been in the field since 1974. So I have seen the history of addiction, particularly, evolve and twist and turn and all of that. In fact, my first job was solely with people who were all recovering via the 12-step program. So I wanted to make a distinction between service and peer recovery. They're not the same.
Right.
And yet I want to validate peer recovery specialists as a professional group versus someone who is doing service work utilizing the 12-step model, because I think that there could be some confusion about that. And I believe that one of my recovering friends said that peer recovery should, his model in his mind, and it kind of stuck with me, is it's sort of like the medical community where you have LPNs, RNs, nurse practitioners, and it's a step into working in that field. So it kind of stuck with me because it was a way to validate people's work. And I think, and also to get proper payment for their work. So I just wanted to offer that perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. I would encourage you to watch the little 2-minute explainer video that can be found on the main page of our website. The one that is titled "What is Peer Support?" kind of lays that out, because those are important distinctions that are sometimes misunderstood. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is a distinct role of a peer recovery support specialist that's different from what happens in 12-step programs. So good point. Thank you.
Nell, I was kind of build on that too. I wanted to get your thoughts to maybe share with the group on sort of in that same area. I know I spent many years in the clinical setting, and prior to leaving, we were starting to hire some of our first peer recovery specialists on our clinical team. And one of the things that came up, and maybe you can address this, a couple of things. One would be sort of the base qualifications. Does a peer recovery coach have to be in recovery? Does a peer recovery coach have to have a minimal time of continuous recovery to be eligible? And then the third piece to that was addressing vulnerability as far as boundaries, as far as susceptibility to relapse, or those sorts of things that you may not see. Certainly the clinician is not immune to that, some of those issues either, but I think in this case, as you referenced, it's a very specific role. And so I wanted to put that out there, maybe to clear up some misnomers, or just to see if others, maybe in the audience wanted to comment on that too.
Well, I can say that one of the things that is interesting that is happening is that there is no standardization across the country. I think that in some ways that could be a good thing, and in other ways that presents sort of a challenge. So there's no national standard that says you have to be in recovery for 2 years before you can become, or whatever, 6 months or whatever, before you can become a peer recovery support specialist. I think that, Adam, again, sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Joe Biden in a recent address said something about creating some standardization in this area, which was, to me, was sort of unexpected. Like, wow, is the president really commenting on this? So there could be some movement towards standardization. A peer recovery support specialist want a central component of their role is lived experience in recovery, whether it's through their own experiences with addiction and recovery or through a family member. That is part of it, but it's not the only thing. So there does need to be some training around things like ethics and boundaries. That's why, if an organization wants to submit for reimbursement through Medicaid, then the peer recovery support specialist has to be certified through their state, and each state has its own standards around the number of hours. In some states you have to take an exam. You might have to pay a $60 fee or something like that. And again, it's not standardized, but I think in every state where reimbursement is happening, there needs to be that certification. You can't just walk in to a treatment center and get a job because you have lived experience. You have to have been trained. as a peer recovery support specialist. So there, it's a little murky. There's a lot of gray area still, but it is, you know, there is movement towards trying to figure some of these things out. And again, we don't, at the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, we don't have an agenda. We don't, you know, we're not here to like put a stake in the ground and say, this is the way it should be done across the country. Our role in a lot of ways is at least for now, is about listening and, you know, kind of bridging the gap between the states or the feds and the, you know, people who are doing this work and needing this support. So in some ways we're, you know, we provide that communication bridge, but a lot of it is around listening and, you know, gathering information. And we can make recommendations, but we don't, I mean, Adam, would you say that that's accurate, that we're not here to necessarily say this is what we're going to do, people? Yeah,
and I can comment on that a little bit. You know, we had our recovery summit August 9th and 10th, first one we've had here since 2010, so we're definitely overdue. That topic came up. There was definitely concern from a lot of peers that the federal government is looking to preempt states. That is not the case from everything I understand. I think if anything happens, there'll be some kind of floor set, or some kind of, if there's going to be some kind of national certification, kind of like my wife's a teacher. A couple of years ago, she got a national certification, which was a different set of standards, but each state will retain the right to you know, set its own standards for someone to become a peer. I don't foresee that changing. So just wanted to share a little bit of what I know on that, but we'll see what happens.
yeah, that's good. Good to know.
Once again, if you want to encourage folks to unmute and share a little. Sorry, I cut you off, Paul. Sorry.
Oops.
Hi, I'm Carden Crow, in Oklahoma, Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Not being shy, I'm just wanting to make sure what I share is relevant. I just messaged Nell directly with information. I'm certainly interested in working with this group. I'm a transgender male, recovering addict, 3+ years, and a Cherokee Nation citizen. And I gained a modest, a very, very modest amount of influence a few years back with I had little spots on like HLN and MSNBC and Huffington Post. And I only mention that because I would be happy to use whatever very modest influence I have to help grow this industry, because this industry is so significant to me now, of course. And one of the things that I spent some time in rehab, and one of the things that I recognize there is that in that rehab process, the teachers with the most education, the most letters and whatever behind their name, they would come in. And the ladies, I was in there with ladies at the time, the ladies who were listening would absolutely turn their back on them. Some of them literally turn their back on them, and some of them just get on their phone, or not their phones, but their, you know, writing tablets and whatnot, and do other things. They had no interest in what these people said, if these people weren't also recovering addicts. And then the ones who would come in with little to nothing under their belt, who were just talking about their own stories and giving their own, you know, recovering stories. Those are the ones that these women held, you know, they hung on every word. It's so, I don't think in the clinical world, or at least what I'm experiencing over here in Oklahoma, that people really recognize the significance of peer specialists in this industry. It means everything. People won't necessarily, the addicts still suffering out there won't listen unless they're, you know, fellow recovering addicts. So very interested in this, and be happy to get involved any way I can. And thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, Carden, thank you so much for your note. Let's definitely connect after this. And you're right, and it's not, it's I don't think that it is a matter of, that lived experience is more valuable than clinical experience, but and it shouldn't be sort of like this competition, like who is providing more value here. It's really important that people understand the differences, between what a clinical person can provide and what a person with lived experience who's trained as a peer recovery support specialist can do. So that's one of the things that we're working through, I think, as a field, is providing that understanding around role differentiation, and that includes other issues like properly supervising within clinical settings and things like that. So yeah.
I think that, oh, sorry, Shane, go ahead.
Oh, no, you can go ahead. I'll wait.
No, I already spoke.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I know here in Michigan, I belong to a group that I network with. They put on lots of trainings, harm reduction, like you name it, and constantly educating me and other people. And something I'm noticing is that there's a lot of people on board who are not necessarily in recovery, but you have people from police officers to firemen, all these professions that are taking the Recovery Coach Academy just to get an understanding. And they're actually going back to their communities and the people that share the same profession, and they're educating them and encouraging them to also take the training as well. So it just exceeds past the recovery community and the recovery movement. It's just people who are affected by it some way, shape, or form. So it's good to see that all these different people, all these different walks of life that are seeing the value, and instead of just doing the tough love, they're actually just getting educated on it in a way that they can help their own communities and family members.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's great.
And just to kind of go along with that, my name's Chrissy Kemp, and I'm with the Choctaw Nation here in Oklahoma. And hey, Carden. So I'm the project director of our TOR grant here, and this is the first time that Choctaw Nation within our grant has had PRSSs. And my background is I was a clinician for a long time in LPC, and it is a huge, like, just to be integrated and work together and do the team approach, because the PRSSs could connect on a totally different level than us as therapists can, like you guys were saying, and just they can fill gaps that we necessarily can't, and connect with those people. So I just kind of wanted to put that in there too. And we've seen a huge difference within Choctaw Nation and the things that our PRSSs are doing. It's been amazing. So I just wanted to kind of follow up with that.
That's great. Thank you.
If I can add one more thing in real quickly. So I'm, by the way, I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Shane Morsaw, the peer recovery coach for the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians here in Northern Michigan. Anytime because I also have a background in working in a treatment facility before I took on this position. And a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of the clients that come in, they all have this vision of how they want their recovery to look like. And, some of them will go around asking the staff members, are you in recovery? Are you in recovery? And they have this mentality that they can only be helped by people that are like us, that, have a substance use disorder. But I always tell them, don't cut yourself short into thinking that you can't be helped by no one other than somebody who is like you.
Yeah.
Everybody is teaching us something, and you can learn something from everyone. So don't cut the people out who are here to help.
Yeah. Shane, what do the clinicians say? Like if they're, because I worked in a treatment center for a number of years as well, not on the clinical side, but I saw this was before my time with the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, but I saw some of this playing out when I was there, where the clinicians would sometimes be a little bit defensive, I guess, about, I think people felt like I went to school for a long time. I paid a lot of money to have these letters behind my name, and I'm being dismissed, as not having value. What do people say? Like if they're asked by someone whether they're in recovery or not, do you think that they have, it's great that you're able to say to people like, don't cut yourself off because, everyone has value, but I wonder if maybe.
Can I interject here?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I'm one of those people. I was
Yes.
trained by service workers. And then I went back to school and I got all the letters. But I think there's a bias here that needs to be addressed, much like there's cultural bias. There's bias about this. And I think what Shane is saying is what I would want somebody to say both ways.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
that there are people that are well trained both by lived experience, but also Western education, and then tribal customs and practices and spirituality. And so I think the complexity of this is more than a binary kind of thing. And when I was working, I worked with my peer recovery specialists as a team. And sometimes I already knew what Kimberly was saying, or was it Carissa? I already knew that the peer recovery specialist was going to connect with the folks differently than me. And I valued that and I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I worked in the team, they would come and we would talk about that so that I could be a better provider for their treatment aspect. So to me, it was a crucial relationship, and it was one that I couldn't provide. And it's not it's not a diminishment of what I had to offer. It was an acknowledgement that I didn't have everything that needed to be available. So yeah, that's the other side of it, is not to say that what you're expressing isn't very common, but I think if we open our minds, if we keep our minds open, we can learn from each other. And I think the field is really changing a lot. It's just really changed so much over the decades I've been in it. And it's just changing a lot right now because there's so much more things coming out, more research, more this, more that. In a Native world, there's more a resurgence of culture and the value of language and culture and customs and traditions. And I personally think that the peer recovery movement is a natural fit for Native communities.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a natural fit because it's more holistic and it is more honoring. And so I'm just really excited for the Native communities to work on this and to validate their culture. It's already there in a way. So yeah, I guess I have a lot of feelings about it, so I go on and on. So I'll shut up now, but.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I think you're right that it's sort of the ideal is that everyone works together as a team and recognizes the value in different roles. But I think that I'm just trying to pay attention because I think that it's one of the areas where the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence could help is in training people who on the clinical side who might not understand the the role and the value of a peer recovery support specialist, and also helping to train peer support workers around how to work with clinicians. Like, how do you effectively work within that clinical system? Because there is a certain culture to those clinical systems. I don't know.
So something I would like to add. So my son is autistic, but we don't treat him according to his diagnosis. We treat him like a person. So there was something one of his OT specialists used to have on her wall, and it says, if they can't learn the way we teach the way that they learn. So if they want to have a serious conversation and they're struggling, I'll pull them aside and I said, what do you want your recovery to look like, and what would be different? You know, so I ask them those two questions, and it's amazing what you can get out of them, because a lot of these things do have to become their own idea, or else they're not going to do any of these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I also let them know that this isn't a competition of who had it the worst either. You know, if anything, we should be pushing ourselves to be better than we were yesterday. And so I don't treat them like they're less than, even though I was there myself. I just talk to them like a person and not like a case number. So.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't mind my adding, I think I framed my statement wrong a little earlier. I think in the rehab situation, when the ladies were listening to the ones with all the education versus the ones who had lived experience, I don't think I mean, the lived experience was significant, but not because of necessarily just what they knew, but because they felt there was going to be a lack of judgment. That is the key. It's not just what they know or don't know. The key is sitting in front of somebody who's been sitting in their shit in the bottom of the bathtub before, who has been laying in their own vomit before. That type of feral state that you get in right before you head to detox, that is a state that nobody wants to be looked at in unless somebody else has been there. That's the power of the peer recovery, not just what they know, but what they've experienced, because the person sitting across from them knows they've experienced some shit and they want to know that they're not going to be judged. That's a thing that, sobering up, you know, in the last 3 years, I recognize that none of us ever really get past the cafeteria table in high school. Eventually, you know, with enough sobriety and whatnot, we do. But for the most part, we're all just still there, and we don't want to be judged. You know, we don't want somebody to think we're gross or think we're lesser than or think there's something wrong with us on that level. We want somebody sitting across the table who's lived there and been that. And I think that's so significant. And I think, and if you don't mind my commenting on Shane just said, an amazing point that he just made. One of the ways that I've learned to approach everybody in recovery is to think of it, and this is just my belief, I'm not shoving this off on anybody else, but I believe that everything is spiritual, everything, but God is personal. In recovery, as Shane was saying, I think, and let me know if I'm misquoting you here, but recovery has to be personal. And there is nobody who knows that better than the person who's been laying in the bottom of the bathtub in their own shit. They know it's got to be personal. I think that's the power that I was commenting on earlier.
Yeah. It's so powerful. Yeah.
I want to thank everyone for this. We really finished on a strong note here, and wow, some really powerful shares. And I want to thank again Nell for joining us on short notice. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and perhaps this conversation can continue amongst your peers, colleagues, and friends. But I just want to thank everyone for attending today, and we want to honor everybody's time. We're at the bottom of the hour. I believe this webinar was scheduled to go through until 2:30 Central. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to anyone, or am I taking us out? Nell, any final thoughts or comments before we conclude?
No, I'll just put my email in the chat one more time. Please reach out if you want to. I'd love to continue talking. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Incredibly powerful. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for letting me step in and pinch hit for Meg on short notice too. That was fun. There was a reason I needed to be here. So heard some wonderful things. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected. And we'll see you again.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.